Hello and welcome to another episode of My Philosophy Book. Now, whether you are a regular listener and you've listened to the past few, or this is your first time, don't worry because it's going to be another amazing episode. If you are a new listener, this won't affect you, but if you have listened to the past few episodes, I'm just going to talk a bit about. This one is going to be slightly different, not hugely. If you listen to the last ones, the format is pretty much the same. I'm going to take you through a philosophical kind of idea or concept and talk about it a little bit and maybe a bit of the background of it and stuff like that. But this is going to be slightly different because listening back on the first few episodes, I just found that I wasn't quite happy with them, and I still think they're pretty good. I'm still proud of them in a way, but doing this, I want to make every episode better than the last. So for this one, I'm going to try something a little bit different, and basically, it's going to be less edited and less scripted. Now, not that there was a huge script beforehand, but what I found was happening was I was, I didn't want to find myself kind of lost for words, or some of the ideas I knew already, or some it was my kind of first time going through them, so I didn't want to forget anything, so I'd make a little list. And then I'd just, write something. Oh, I'd say, this is roughly what I'm going to say when I get to this bit. But then I found I was just expanding on that each episode, like writing it down and then just saying exactly that, and it did become a script. And then because of that, because I had a script when I was editing it, coming back to it, any kind of mistakes or all the ms and and pauses, all that kind of stuff, which I hate, but I just cut all of those out because they were really annoying. But I don't know, just listening back on them, and although content-wise, I'm pretty happy with how they turned out, and I think there's nothing wrong with having a tightly packed podcast like that where you're just kind of getting information. It was a bit sterile or a bit lifeless. So I'm hoping leaving this a little more natural is going to put a bit of life back into it, or you just get a bit more character in it. So we'll see how it goes. And then I don't know. You can let me know whether you liked it or not. But I was finding I wasn't enjoying doing it in that style. I wasn't looking forward to scripting out a whole another episode, because that's what it was becoming, and then spending ages like editing every little bit. So we'll try it this way and we'll see. But anyway, back to the show. So, as I said, this is my philosophy book. Where did I get it? That's the thing. So, the other day, I was out on an expedition, as I go many a time, because that's one of my hobbies. And I brought with me my 6 school children. They're not my children, but they're my sidekicks, and I bring them when I'm going on an expedition. It's cool. Anyway, so I'm out there. I'm in some country, and I come across this temple, this amazing, beautiful stone monolith of a thing. We go in, and I have to navigate all these different kind of booby traps. It's like if you go into the light, then the spears come out at you, and the arrows are shooting if you step on the wrong stones on the floor. So I worked my way through all these booby traps, and I get into the main room, the central chamber of this temple. So in the center of this room, on this stone altar, is this big book, and I knew that this is what I was going to find in here. I was sent on it. The quest was given to me by my Granny Tubman, and I go in, and I have to, measure out a bag and make sure it weighs the same as the book, but it doesn't. The ball comes chasing after me. This big stone ball, and me and my 6 schoolboy apprentices were running through the jungle, but luckily we have our escape balloon that I set up beforehand, because as I said, I'm a very good adventurer. So we managed to get away with the philosophy book and all 6 children intact. Job well done. Not so fast, however, because when we're up in the air, all the indigenous people of the jungle and the temple who live there, they weren't very happy about me stealing this philosophy book. So they start throwing spears, and one of them hits the balloon. So we start going down. Now, the problem is we are over shark-infested waters, and we're going down fast. So we start throwing everything over the side of the balloon. Anything we can to lose as much weight as possible. So we're throwing food and blankets and a collection of rocks that we brought along with us. We realize it gets to the point that we are going to be eaten by these sharks. This is the only way it's going to go down. There's nothing left to throw overboard. It's just me and these 6 kids. However, we all kind of start thinking the same thing. We all look to the same kid because there is little Gunter. And I say little Gunter. He was quite big for his age and quite heavy. So the question arose in our minds, if we threw Gunter overboard into the shark-infested water, he would obviously die, but we would live. By losing the weight, the balloon would have enough lift to get us past the shark-infested waters to safety. So, do the ends justify the means? And that's what we're going to be talking about today, ends and means, which is something I'm sure most people have probably heard about before, or you're acquainted with the terms ends and means. Maybe you're not 100% sure what they mean, like you've heard them, but you wouldn't be super confident like explaining them. But regardless, we're going to go through them now. So, the ends and the means. What is the means? It's the thing you do to get to the ends. What is the end? It's the result. It's the consequence. So, say you want to go to the shop. The means is you have to get up and walk. The ends is you've arrived at the shop. It's as simple as that. It's the thing you do and the result of that thing you do. Now, obviously, getting up and going to the shop isn't a great kind of ethical quandary. You're not going to stay up at night and scratch your head and wake up in a cold sweat thinking about it. But let's think about the example we just had. So me and my 6 sidekicks, my 6 schoolboy apprentices, we're all in this hot air balloon. We're trying to get away, and we are stuck in this situation where there's only 2 options, really. It comes down to one of 2 things, and the way it's going to go down is this. Either we all crash and die. That's a certainty. If we do nothing now, we will all go down and we will all be eaten by sharks. However, if we throw Gunter overboard, yes, he will be eaten by sharks, he will be dead, but me and the other 5 boys will live. So, surely that's the better outcome. I mean, one where everyone dies or one where only one person dies, isn't that an easy kind of question? Maybe. Maybe not to you, but is that just because the way we're going about it is bad? I mean, we see it as morally wrong to cause the death of someone, but whether we push him overboard or whether we do nothing, Gunther is going to die. Let's just say that. I'm not, 80 years from now in a bed, in this situation that we find ourselves in, he will either be eaten by sharks when we all crash, or eaten by sharks when we throw him overboard. So if he's going to be eaten either way, does it not make sense to throw him overboard so he can be eaten like he was always going to be, but the rest of us, me and the 5 boys, can live? Now, I'm not trying to brainwash you with this. I'm just, I suppose, playing devil's advocate here and kind of giving you the argument for why you should do this, because when we get into this, you kind of have to look at both sides objectively. But that's just one example, and obviously it's pretty far-fetched, the idea of me ballooning around the world's jungles, kind of searching temples for hidden treasures with 6 schoolboy sidekicks. But let's look at some other examples. So usually I'd kind of explain maybe a bit more of the background or the thinking, but this one I feel is almost not so much self-explanatory, but there's not a whole lot to dive too deeply into this one. It's more about how you apply it to situations. So instead of just talking about it too much, we'll get onto that a little bit later. We'll come up with some scenarios, and I will say there is a real philosophy book. You know, there's a few sources, but there is one main book that I use. And some of the examples that we'll talk about, I kind of thought of or have seen other places, but some of them are from this book. So I would feel remiss, I guess, or feel bad if I didn't mention it a little bit, because then I feel like that's just blatant theft. So the book I have that I'm looking at with some of these examples, it's called 50 Ideas You Really Need to Know Philosophy by Ben Dupree. So imagine this. There's a plane. It's full of people. I don't know how many people fit in a plane. Probably like 150 or something, or 200 people. A load of people on a plane. It's going down. It's going to crash. No matter what you do, there's nothing to be done. It's on a collision course, and it's going to crash into a very populated area, kind of urban, small city kind of area with thousands of people in. So you've got a couple of hundred people on the plane and a couple of thousand people down on the ground, and it's going to crash into that area, and it will kill a great many people down there. So your options are do nothing, or gonna leave the plane, or shoot it down. That seems to be the only option. You have to shoot it down before it crashes. And it's funny because describing this, I think there will be two kinds of people. The people who are very, very objectional when it comes to these kind of scenarios, who can say, well, obviously, yeah, shoot them down because you're saving more lives. But there are people who I imagine are maybe a bit more sentimental, and they might think, shooting down the plane may seem like a good idea, but there's always the what ifs. There's always the, like how many people on the plane, though they may crash, they might survive, or maybe they just have a problem with condemning someone to death, being the person to end their life. If the plane crashes, that's not their fault, but if they have to give the order, they have to pull the trigger and shoot down the plane, they are killing those people. But as I said, there are more objectional or objective views, and I think I would kind of fall down on that side, where you could look at it and say that the plane is crashing. The minute the plane went down and it started its collision course, those people were already dead. Nothing could affect that outcome, so you may as well try and lessen the collateral damage. And this may seem slightly similar to there's that other kind of like thought experiment, I guess, kind of thing you'd call it, where it's like, there's there's a train, going on the tracks, and on the tracks it splits. On one there's three people, and on the other it's one person. And if you do nothing, the train will kill three people, but you have had no hand in it. Or you can pull the lever and switch the tracks, and it will kill one person, but you have actively taken a part in killing that person. And I think that's kind of it's a similar kind of thinking. It's the ends, do the ends justify the means? But also it has that kind of, I suppose when people talk about that one in particular, the train tracks one, it's not so much about, or the emphasis isn't put on, the ends and the means. It's more, I suppose, how you feel about it. Could you be the person to take that life? And I suppose that might help you put this into context, why it does cause, a pause for thought, that it isn't kind of black and white, isn't very simple, that people do have reservations about these kind of choices. So here's another example from my philosophy book. A Gestapo officer rounds up 10 children and threatens to shoot them unless they reveal the identity and whereabouts of a spy. But, as it happens, you are the person in this situation who they've kind of cornered, and they said, we have all your kids, we're going to shoot you if you don't tell us the spy. You don't know about any spy, you have no idea, but they're not going to believe you. So what do? Do you try and convince them? Do you say, I don't know, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't know any spy, and just kind of hope they believe you? Or do you just say someone's name? Anyone's name. Could be someone you could make up a name, and hopefully that they'll take it and they'll leave because you've given them information. The problem is, you give them a name, even a fake name, it could end up being a real person who is then taken away. Then in this context, obviously, if it's a Gestapo kind of officer, probably quite a horrific death, and kind of torture and that kind of stuff is going to happen to this person, but you're saving the lives of these children. So do the means, or does the end justify the means? Another one here from the book is so you're on a flight, small passengers on a small airplane, not small passengers, just regular sized passengers on a small airplane, and you're going over the mountains and you crash. So there's no food and you're gonna starve well, uh, before any kind of help arrives. But you think if you just had enough food to keep you going for like a week or two, that you might make it till a rescue party gets there. Where's this source of meat? Well, it could be one of yous. But then how do you choose which person is the meat? Maybe someone died, maybe they didn't, maybe you all want to live, but does the ends justify the means? I mean, looking at it logically and objectively, you should say, well, yes, my life, though you cannot put a value on a life, surely, the lives of everyone else, like 6 other people, however many people were on the plane, is worth more than my one life. So I should be, willing to give up that to sustain the others, because that'll affect the best result for the kind of greater community, the needs of the many. Another one from the book. We have conjoined twins, also known as Siamese twins, are both certain to die within a few months unless they are surgically separated. The operation, however, offers excellent prospects that one of them is going to live and have a healthy, happy life, but the other one will die. So, what do you do? I mean, if you're that doctor, and put yourself in the position of the doctor in this one, do you go ahead with the operation? Because if these two twins aren't separated, they will die. But if you do the operation, one will definitely die by your hand. And that seems to be the crux of a lot of these things, is people will die, but less people will die if you actively take a part in the death that does happen. And that's the hang up for people. It's that they don't want to cause death. They don't want to be a part of it. If death happens every day. We see accidents, terrible things happen, but we can, go to bed at night and we can sleep with ourselves knowing that it wasn't anything to do with us. It was out of our control. But if you are put in control, you are directly responsible for the life and death of one or more people, and particularly the death. And I think that's the bit when you say you're responsible for the life of someone, like say a parent. That's an immense responsibility, but it's doable and it's got its own rewards. But if you are responsible for the death of someone, you are actively taking a role in their demise. I think that's too much for people, and that's what causes these dilemmas. Now, maybe you've heard one or more of those kind of ideas before, those situations before. And if you had, it's no use kind of going over them again and thinking about them now, because we're going to go a little bit into the background now, as I said, and the thinking behind these and the philosophy behind the means and the ends. So, I have a quote here. It says, "The end may justify the means so long as there is something that justifies the end." And that was from Leon Trotsky. So I'm sure many of you have heard the terms the means and the ends, as I said before, and heard the term "do the ends justify the means." But this quote is kind of interesting because I think it gives a bit of a subtle twist, if you kind of look at it. So the end may justify the means so long as there is something that justifies the end. So that's kind of like the way I'm reading that and the way I'm interpreting that, and maybe you feel differently, but is that if you want to do something bad, I guess, which is what people say, do the ends of a war, like dropping an atomic bomb on Japan. People may say the end justified the means of ending the war. So the end was to finish the war. The means was dropping an atomic bomb on a country. A terrible, terrible atrocity which caused, untold horrors and deaths. Now, maybe many, many more people would have died if they hadn't. If a war had have continued, many more lives could have been lost and many more atrocities committed. So the end may have justified the means. In that case, now I'm not saying that does, but that's just an example of something that, is quite terrible. But you could come around to seeing why or how the people made this decision. They probably went through this kind of this decision-making process of the ends and the means. So the end, ending the war, the means, dropping the bomb. So the end may justify the means, so long as something justifies the end. So, ending the war, what justifies that? Saving more lives. And that's why you see the ends justify the means. But I think what's clever about this is because people say the ends justify the means, and that's kind of it's a belief in and of itself. So you could say that about anything. You could say, I didn't like my neighbor, so I shot him. The end was I got rid of him. The means was I shot him, but the ends justified the means because he's gone now. But that doesn't work when you put it with the end may justify the means, so long as there is something that justifies the end. What justifies you getting rid of your neighbor? Nothing really, you just didn't like him. So there is no justification for what you did. The ends did not justify the means, and that was bad. That was a bad way of going about it. It was a bad decision. It was immoral. So you see how this, seemingly simple quote adds a bit of a clever twist, I think. So decisions like this are pretty popular in fiction and other kinds of media, be it films and television, books and that kind of stuff. There's so many examples out there, but the one that kind of sticks out to me personally is Star Trek, as a franchise that deals with this kind of ends justifying the means very well. If you watch, for example, The Next Generation, and even some of the earlier original series and then into Deep Space Nine, there's a lot of this kind of decision making where a decision has to be made, but to do it you may have to sacrifice your own kind of moral fiber. You might have to do something which may seem wrong, but do the ends justify the means? Sacrificing lives to save others, that kind of stuff. But the best example, or probably the most well-known example from Star Trek and the Star Trek universe, is in Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, when Spock sacrifices his own life to save the entire crew. So they're caught in a pitched battle, ship versus ship, between the Enterprise and Khan, and then Khan disables the Enterprise somehow, and some part of the engine, which is very radioactive, is damaged, and Spock goes down to fix it himself. But the only way he can fix it is if he goes into the engine and exposes himself to the radiation. So he does that, and then saves the ship, saves the crew, and when he's dying, Kirk is, he's given out to him a little bit, being like, well, why would you do that? And Spock says, one of his most famous lines is, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. And what does he mean by that? Pretty much that, yes, going into this kind of radiation place would kill him, but the cost of one life is justification enough for the many other lives on the crew that were then saved. The end was justified by the means because the end in itself was justifiable. Saving lives is a justifiable cause, and that's one example that's pretty prevalent in my mind anyway, because I'm a big Star Trek fan of this kind of thinking. But as I said, if you go and watch some of the seasons, it's riddled throughout all them as well, so I'd recommend giving them a watch. But this is not only something that occurs in fiction, and all the examples we thought about a bit earlier, kind of towards the beginning of the episode, were fictitious, I guess. To my knowledge, they're not based on any like one real circumstance. Obviously, things like that happen, but I don't know of any case where those specific set of circumstances played out. However, as I said, things like that do happen, and it's not out of the realm of possibility like that crashing plane, like we talked about earlier, is going down, and someone might need to have to make the decision to shoot it down before it crashes and potentially save lives by ending others. Just as a side note, because when I was coming up with I suppose the layout or the running order of the episode, and kind of going through the different points that I wanted to hit as we went on, I just think it's interesting that kind of if you've listened to some of the other episodes already, or you might go and listen to them after this, if you like what you hear. If you listen back on, especially the one on where we talk about relativity, it's funny that we talk about how when you have kind of choices or options, it's not necessarily a case of right or wrong. It's more of a scale or a spectrum as such. That what we believe to be the correct thing to do might not be the right thing to do, or what we believe is right might not be right to someone based on their perspective. However, this kind of form of thinking or this decision making, do the ends justify the means? I think that's slightly, I think that's a bit more interesting because it's slightly different in the way that you have to be a bit more decisive. You can't just kind of leave it up to, well, each to their own, and oh, well, that's what you choose, and this is what I choose, and there is no right and wrong. It doesn't really matter what's right and wrong, depending on how you look at it, of course, on the grander scale. But just this way, look at it this way for a second. There is no right or wrong. There's just two options. It comes down to or a couple of options, but an option has to be chosen, a decision has to be made. So you can't just kind of chalk it up to a mystery. Whether you act or you decide not to, action or inaction, a result will come of that, and you have to live with that. So, for example, the plane crashing. If you choose to do nothing, if you choose to abstain from getting involved, that is a choice. Whether you'd like to admit it or not, you have chosen one of the options. One of the options was to shoot it down, the other was not. And by doing nothing, you chose the latter. You chose not to do anything, and that resulted in much more people dying, or in anything. Inaction is as much of an action sometimes, especially when it comes to these decisions. So it pays to be decisive, and it's quite good to think about these kind of things and the ends and the means, because if you do ever find yourself, hopefully you don't, but if you do ever find yourself in a situation like this, maybe similar, if you've practiced your critical thinking, you might find it, I don't know, easier, or maybe not easier, maybe easier isn't the right word, but it won't be so much as a shock, or you won't go into shock and through not wanting to do the wrong thing, choose inaction, which is in itself a choice. You will have the capacity to make a choice, whether it's for the best, whether it's for better or for worst. But that's just a little kind of side note. Back to the ethics of it. So this is the philosophy bit. This isn't just conversation and thought experiment. This is the meat and potatoes of it. This is the bit you want. So there's two main different views. As with anything, I'm sure there's infinite number of views. I'm sure if you go down O'Connell Street, there's a guy who has his own view on it. But the two main ones are the I'm not going to be able to say this now. Consequentialists, because consequence, and the deontologists. So consequentialists and deontologists. Okay, so I told you I wouldn't be able to say it. Consequentialism is, I should say, when viewing this, it's about the decision-making process. So if you are a consequentialist, you are going to look at something in terms of how bad or how good it is. The means. How bad or how good are the means you're using to get to the end. So if your end is you want to be rich, you want to make loads of money, you look at the means by which you can achieve it. So you think, well, I could play the lotto. I could buy a lottery ticket once a week for from now until I die, maybe, and just hope that one day I'll get lucky and I'll win it big, and maybe you will. Or you could go out and rob a bank. It's a bit more surefire way. But as a consequentialist, you're going to look at the inherent kind of, I suppose, rightness and wrongness of those options. So robbing a bank is bad. It's immoral to steal things. It's against the law. It'll get you in trouble. It's much more dangerous. Playing the lotto is safer. It's not going to result in kind of massive injury or death or a prison sentence, but it's much more of a gamble. However, looking at your different options, you might go with the lotto because it's a good choice in the long run. You may not get the money straight away, but over time it might pay off, and the risk of robbing a bank is too much. So you're going to weigh up the good options and the bad options, pretty much the pros and cons. Or to take our example from earlier with the balloon, me and my 6 children in the balloon, you might look at it and go, okay, well, we could all die, that's bad, or we could actively kill Gunther, throw him off the balloon, and he'll be dead. That's also bad, but letting 6 people die is worse, so we'll kill Gunther. So it's not necessarily about doing, I suppose, the morally right thing, but you take that into account and you pick the least bad thing, because you don't want to do bad things, but you might have to based on the consequence you need. So let's say we go back to you want to be rich. Now, our 2 options were you can play the lotto, which might not ever pay off, or you can rob a bank, which is very dangerous and bad. But what if something in between popped up, a third option, a magical option number C? You are out walking and you see there's one of those kind of armored delivery vans, and they're putting the money, they have the back doors open, they're putting the money from the van into the bank, and for some reason, kind of like in Groundhog Day, it's some old kind of security guard, and he's gone in and he's left the door unlocked, and there's 2 big bags of money sitting there. Now, it's morally wrong, you're still stealing, but the risk is a lot lower, and the potential for success is a lot higher than the lottery. So, weighing that up and measuring the different options, you might say, well, although it's morally wrong, it's a much more surefire way of getting the money, and it's less bad than robbing a bank. It's the least bad option, so you might go with that. And this way of weighing up the goodness and the badness, or the pros and the cons, I think is something that most of us do. Or I can safely assume that most of us do that. Just in everyday life, when it comes to anything, you go, what am I going to do about this situation? You make a little list mentally, or some people actually do write it down, about the good things and the bad things, and you pick the least bad option. The best option would be ideal, but sometimes it's about the least bad option. Then, of course, we come to the second school of thought, which is deontology. And this is very similar, but slightly different, as most things are in philosophy. So, the main difference, it boils down to the deontologists believe that actions aren't just means to an end. It's not just another option to consider. Some things are inherently good and some things are inherently bad. So it's not about picking the least bad option. You shouldn't do bad things. So, take it back to the balloon. We're all going to die unless we throw Gunther overboard, but then we take a part in killing him. Now, while the consequentialists might say the consequence of throwing Gunther overboard kind of evens out. It's a bad thing, but he was going to die either way, and then we all live, so it's the least bad thing we can do. Deontologists say killing an innocent person in any capacity is wrong, and this mean can never the end can never justify this means. You cannot use this as an excuse to kill someone. You can't push Gunther out of the balloon in this situation because they believe that is wrong. That's not the way to go about it. So I'm curious to see what you think about that, because obviously deontology, a bit similar. You weigh up, the options in terms of how inherently good or inherently bad they are. But deontologists are quite stricter when it comes to this, and I suppose in that situation they would let themselves die. They would let themselves, be eaten and drowned by the sharks because it is so morally abhorrent to kill Gunther. They won't allow that. And I don't know, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me personally, but maybe it makes perfect sense to you. Maybe your own ethics and your own moral code are worth it. To some people, maybe they are. Self-respect, things like this. But in a nutshell, that's the two different kinds of thoughts when it comes to ends and means. And as we've said a couple of times in this podcast already, there is the term ends justify the means, the ends justifying the means. And we've touched on that a little bit, but and we touched on our quote from Trotsky about the ends justifying the means so long as the ends are justified, and that's all well and good. The problem, however, is when people leave off that last little bit. So, as we said, the quote is, the ends justify the means so long as the ends can be justified. People use this as an excuse, like so many things. They take it and they twist it and they use it for their own kind of vile and evil purposes. The ends justifying the means. If everyone was the same, if everyone was the same, there would be no war, because there would be no hatred. There would be nothing to distinguish each other and use it as a basis for racism or anti-Semitism, anything like that. If everyone looked the same way and spoke the same way and was the same religion, then the world would probably be a better place, right? Maybe you don't agree with that, but let's just say, for argument's sake, we live in this world where everyone is exactly the same. Then there would be no distinguishing feature that people could base irrational hatreds on. So you might think, well, if there was some way we could get to that, that's a good end. That's a good that's an end, and surely whatever means to get there might be justified because it would end all war, it would be peace everywhere, and blah blah blah. Now, obviously, that's a very kind of general and sweeping kind of analogy or a metaphor, or whatever you want to call it, and not 100% applicable. But just for argument's sake, and to keep it simple, we'll kind of stick with that. But then, the ends do not always justify the means, because we think, has anyone ever tried to do that in history? And we look back on the likes of Adolf Hitler, who had a very similar plan. He had the master race in mind. And think about it for a second. If he had have succeeded, his plan was world domination, more living space for his people to breed the Aryan race, the blonde hair, blue-eyed, tall and handsome. And if there was a world where everyone was blonde, blue-eyed, tall and handsome, and all that kind of stuff, I think there is a point that you could say, well, then there's no one left to be racist towards it. There's no one left to be anti-Semitic towards, and all that kind of stuff. Now, I don't think it would have panned out like that in reality, but that's the thinking, and that's the problem. It's people see this and they go, well, that's the ends, and whatever means we use to get to that ends, we are justified in taking. Now, obviously, that's a very extreme example, as I said, but when looking at the ends of the means, I think it is only appropriate to look at all possible ends And that's another problem with the ends, because the ends you seek and the means you use to achieve them don't always result in the ends you wanted. You could take an action which you believe to have a certain consequence and it has a completely different consequence. So I think it's important to look at all different possible alternatives and different options that may occur from your actions. And if people did that, if people not only thought about their actions and their consequences, but all possible consequences, not to be, timid or shy, you shouldn't fear things, but as I said, it is important because there are people who don't think about their actions or consequences, and there are people who think about them too much. So a healthy balance is always the best course of action. But in general, that is the ends and the means, the pros and the cons, the thing you want and what you're going to do to get it. So that's pretty much the episode as a whole. I hope you enjoyed, whether this was your first time listening or you're returning from another episode. I hope you found something kind of useful or informative, or I don't know, just entertaining, or maybe it's just you like to have noise on in the background to fall asleep to. If you got use out of it, then I'm happy. But maybe there's something you can do for me. If you join my Patreon and give me $7,000, I will send you a picture of my grandmother. But not really. No, I'm interested in what you thought of this different kind of episode. So it's probably going to be a bit longer once it's all kind of cut together, which is kind of what I wanted as well, because some of the episodes I thought they were a bit too densely packed. So I didn't want to fill it up with different kind of fluff. I just wanted to extend it out a bit, extend it out a little bit, and as I said earlier, make it a little less kind of sterile and kind of clean cut, and put a bit of life and a bit of kind of, I don't know, naturality. That's not a word, but naturalness and kind of humanity into it, and a bit more of my own personality into it as well, because I feel like that wasn't really coming across as well, and that's one of the reasons why I wasn't looking forward to doing the next episode, because I don't know, I was putting on this kind of I don't know what you'd call it. By the way, if you're still listening and you're waiting for more kind of philosophy stuff, there's no more philosophy stuff. This is just going to talk about the podcast. So, be warned. But basically, I wasn't looking forward to doing the next kind of couple of podcasts, because I knew, or I had a rough idea of which ones I wanted to do, or like which topics I wanted to cover, but I wasn't sure. I was just like, oh, like the thoughts of like, going through them and going to the script and doing all this kind of stuff. But I knew I needed to try something different. So this is me, I suppose, taking the first step to injecting a bit of my own personality into this. Hopefully in the next couple episodes, if if I get a response, that'd be great. But if not, I'll just kind of go based on my own instinct. And if I feel that this kind of worked better in a way, then great, I'll keep rolling with it. I'm hoping as well, I'd like to get some like guests, obviously not kind of like Ryan Reynolds or anything, no big guests, but just other people, other kind of co-hosts on, because I think that will help liven it up a bit as well, and it'll make it more of a discussion. Someone who can voice the opinions of the audience, because it's all well and good me talking to you now, but I can hear your response, and maybe sometimes there's people who, they already know what I'm talking about and they're like, yeah, just move on. Or maybe they want me to explain a bit more, a point that I kind of rushed over, and I don't know that. And, I hate to think that there's someone who is genuinely listening and they enjoy it, but they're not getting the most out of it because I'm not there with them. I'm not able to hear their feedback as it's happening. But if I had a guest on, that might help that, because then they might say, yeah, we get it, move on, stop talking about this. Or they might say, whoa, hold up, you kind of flew through that last bit, and you go back on that again. And I'll say, Okay. So, if you like this episode, I would recommend subscribing to my Acast or to the Spotify link or wherever you're listening on um, iHeartRadio or TuneIn or whichever. Um, Subscribe to me. That way you can find out when I put out the latest episodes. If this is your first episode, go back and watch the other ones because there's some pretty interesting ideas, and also you get to see the difference, the contrast between this episode and the first episode, and you know what I mean, and why I'm saying this one is going to be slightly different. And if you're all up to date and you've watched all the episodes so far and you're like a complete super fan, watch them again. Why not? Or listen to them again. In the gym, in the tub, I don't care. Do it. But in terms of feedback, because if you want to get in touch and let me know what you thought for whatever reason, whether it's bad or good or indifferent, follow me on Twitter. I'd say is the best place to get in contact. It's Twitter handle at KennyD129. So follow me on there and tweet at me suggestions or ideas or criticisms or just anything. I don't know, like pictures of your grandma maybe. But that's it. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up now and stop taking up so much of your time. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again next time.